Hello, this is Joshua from Frost Dragon Designs, and today I'd like to talk to you about my Kitty Yaga and Enchanted Chicken Hut hard enamel pin designs.
Every year since I started Frost Dragon Designs, I've done a witch cat themed project in the autumn. In 2017, my first year running my business, it was a little cat with a pointy hat, a cloak, and a brooch holding it closed. I did this in 3 different color schemes, all of which proved to be quite popular. For 2018, I have a little witch riding a cat, and I have a cat under a witch's hat playing with a star on it. Now, the witch riding the cat proved not to be terribly popular, but the cat under the hat was very popular and sold out very quickly. In 2019, I had the idea of these mischievous kittens that the witch had adopted, and these were some of the misadventures that they were getting up to. I particularly enjoy the cauldron cat. In 2020, I extended that idea by imagining that perhaps 3 of those kittens had, become apprentices of the witch. So we have this little cat with the purple hat and cloak who is riding a broom. We have the blue hat and cloak who's mixing some sort of a potion. I hope they're being safe. And then we have a kitty with a red hat and cloak who's got a magic wand. Although when you scale it down for the size of the cat, it's kind of like a staff. In 2021, I did what I called the Black Cat Holiday Celebration. While I still have a witch kitty, I decided that I really wanted to showcase black cats throughout the year and not just at Halloween. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do for 2022, but I ended up landing on the idea of working with Baba Yaga from Slavic folklore as my inspiration. She's got several very memorable traits that would translate very well into a design, I thought. For one, she rides around in a giant pestle and mortar, which is pretty fun if you think about it. Second, she carries a broom with her that she uses to sweep up any traces of her presence. And the last one that I think is quite unique is that she has a chicken hut. It's basically a shack in the woods that has chicken feet. It's been depicted as both having 2 large feet, like I chose to do, but I've also seen illustrations where it has many small feet, which is quite creepy if you think about it. So for my design, I started off with this sketch of a very small kind of dark wooden shack with chicken feet. You'll see that the idea for this changes quite a bit as I work on it, but that's really the fun of working on these designs. You start off with one idea, but you can get down these little alleyways of thought, and you end up with something better than what you originally had planned for. So let's get into the design. The first thing I ended up doing was changing the canvas size. I usually work with a 1.5-inch canvas for the pins, but I knew that this chicken hut was going to be significantly larger than my normal pins, so I set it up as a 2.5-inch by 2.5-inch square, just so I could get the scale. It doesn't necessarily need to fit inside of that. I just needed to understand the scale that I was working with. And those red lines that you see there, I've basically set those up to try and work out perspective as a 2-point perspective. I think you'll see pretty quickly that I end up abandoning those because while it was a good idea, I felt like this design really needed to be something more whimsical than technical. So at that point, it was less about where the actual vanishing points would be in a 2-point perspective, and more about just what felt correct for the design itself. You can see my vertical walls kind of curve, they bow out as they go up. It just really helps lend kind of a whimsical, fun feeling to this chicken hut, which I really kind of originally, as you saw in the sketch, imagined as more of a shack. It was supposed to be like a wooden type structure, kind of like a barn, like with the vertical slats and dark wood was my original thought for what this chicken hut would look like. So, at this point you can see I'm starting to add the little front porch. I've got the basic roof and a basic kind of shack shape, and I think it looks pretty good. I'm adding some little steps. Those were nice. You can see I've completely gotten rid of my perspective lines at this point. We're adding in some temporary chicken feet. So the fun thing about this chicken hut, according to the lore and the folk tales, this hut kind of danced around in a circle, and it did some other things, and it seemed to be a living entity unto itself.
So the idea is that basically this is a chicken hut. You can see what I did there. I just pasted in two very nice looking legs. And if you're wondering where those came from, those are actually the legs that are on my Gnome Knight chicken rider pin. You'll see me do this a lot in other videos. I am a big fan of recycling visual assets that I've already created. If I already spent the time to do it once, I am perfectly fine with using it again in a different way. So those same legs basically started out as my starting point for the legs in this. If you look at the final pin design, you'll see that I've done a lot of editing to them, but I was fine with using them as a starting point. I'm adding this little, I guess that's kind of like a cooling box off to the side of it. Old school cabins and that sort of thing would have an exterior piece that was usually, a cellar type thing. People could put root vegetables and things in it. It also kind of helped the leg area look more filled out. You can see I'm now working on a chimney. These designs go really quick. When I'm talking and doing these, I speed them up, obviously. I want to say that this one is probably sped up 8 times compared to what it actually was. I think that sounds correct. So, even with this long length of video, things are still pretty quick. So the chimney's now done, and I've got this structure, and you can see I'm making some adjustments to it. I'm exaggerating it even more. Like I'm bringing that top eave of the roof. I brought it forward, and I'm playing with the color, trying to find something that I think looks nice. Adjusted that window that's above the door. This originally kind of had like a birdhouse look to it, I think, which is kind of interesting. But you can see I just keep, exaggerating the shapes and bringing it a little further along. And it's actually kind of interesting to watch this process now after the fact, seeing kind of the evolution of the design itself. Because, right now it's still pretty similar to that original sketch that I showed you. But the final product that we have ends up looking more like a Tudor style home than anything else, which is kind of funny. So you can see I just kind of added the edge pieces for the openings for the windows and the door, kind of give it a 3-dimensional type look. There seem to be, when I'm watching this, there seem to be some gaps in the action, and I'm wondering, I think what's probably happening with those... Oh, I just changed that big front window into an eyeball. That's, I remember that. That's funny. So I tried that. I thought that was kind of creepy. And then for some reason I got this idea. What if we have an extension on the front of the house instead of it being just that little porch roof? What if it was like she had the cabin and then like she did a room addition, but the little room addition was on the second floor. It wasn't on the first floor. And so that's where this is starting to go. And what I find funny about it is, like, looking at the final pin design, you can very clearly see the chicken body shape that was in there. But that was not planned. I mean, that just started happening organically as I started thinking about, what do I want to do with this design? I didn't like just a little porch roof. So then I ended up with that kind of room addition on the front. And then somewhere along the way, I just thought to myself, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we used those as kind of like the neck and tail area? And if I put one on the back, it could be like a tail area of the chicken. And if I have the one on the front, it could be like the neck of the chicken. And then suddenly I was just like, oh, wow, this is funny. I can make this house architecturally, the shapes, I can bring those in line with the general shape of chicken body. And I just got so silly excited about this idea, and I just had to work with it. My kids thought I was absolutely crazy, especially when we get to later parts of this design. But, when I showed this to them and they were, commenting as they came in and out of the room while I was working on it, I think they thought that I was just nuts. I mean, they don't know anything about the folklore surrounding the Baba Yaga character that this is based on, and they don't know about, her enchanted chicken hut. But it's just funny that I kind of took it a step further, because it's only described as a hut on chicken legs. I kind of took it to the step of, it's a chicken hut, like a legit chicken hut. So I think that's kind of funny. This is also funny to me because when I was designing this was around the time that we got our chickens. Just this year, we got 15 baby chicks in the mail, which is a whole funny thing by itself. That's how you get them when you don't buy them locally. They send them to you in the mail. They're now pretty big chickens now. They're out in my yard in cover. Their chicken coop is not finished yet, but it will be soon. My wife is building that. She's a very handy person. She does a lot of woodworking, which is kind of very cool. So, but I think I was kind of inspired by the combination of working on this design while getting those chickens. And I think that's where a lot of the inspiration for this came from. There was another little pause just a second ago in this video, and it's not that, I wasn't doing something. I think I was actually kind of sitting back trying to evaluate things. But this is cool. What I'm doing now is I'm adding stones, like it would be a foundation if this were a structure that was planted on the ground, which is kind of an interesting concept, right? Because the foundation is supposed to be the part that's like kind of immovable. It's the sturdiest part of a building. If this were planted in the ground, those stones might be buried in the ground a little bit to add strength to the structure. You could also have a basement that way if they go down far enough. But this is up on chicken legs, so those stones are really humorous to me because they don't really connect to anything. So you can see now I've changed the color and I've started adding trim to this. And I think I'm trying to figure out, is this the direction that I really want to go with this design or not? Because originally, like I said, it was all supposed to be dark wood. It was supposed to have kind of a wood shack feeling to it. But then as I'm working on it, I'm just kind of like, maybe we could go with more of a Tudor style structure. Tudor homes typically have dark wood trim with kind of a stucco or some sort of lighter color material in between them. Very popular in Renaissance, like 1600s, I believe. So it kind of works really well with this concept design that I'm working on, and I ran with it. I love Tudor style architecture. I think it's very pretty. It's it's what I think of when I think of the Renaissance and like high class fantasy cities. It's the structures that I imagine there for residential areas. So I just started adding trim all over the place. And this is actually like another cool thing for me, because part of what is fun about working on these pin designs is coming up with ways to make them detailed and draw the viewer's attention to the design itself. I love designs that, you can look at it real quick and understand what it is. I don't want things to be visually confusing, but I love when you can look at it real quick, know what it is, but then if you sit and look at it for a little while, you're rewarded by finding interesting little details. So that's something that I think is really cool about this design and the architectural choice that I went with. So you probably just saw a second ago, there was kind of a wisp of white smoke that I tried to put around the chicken house in general. I tried that several times, I think, before I get something that I actually like. We've just added another detail. We've, added the door. We've got planks for the door. Now we're adding a frame for the door. There's just a whole lot of little cells with different colors on this design because of the nature of the Tudor home and, the trim work, making sure that it's got, multiple sides and the boards. And then we're going to get to the point of the tiles on the roof, and that's going to be fun too. So now I'm adding the moss to the roofs. The roofs. The reason I wanted there to be moss is, one, because, old buildings do tend to get, mossy at points. But the other thing is I think it kind of adds like an old world charm kind of feel to this piece. And the other thing it really does is it visually breaks up the colors. Because if we look at all the other colors here, yeah, we have the gray, which is a coolish color. But everything else is either black or a warm color. I mean, that cream, the red, the brown, all very warm tones. And I think just giving something in addition to the gray, giving that green as something that can draw the eye away and give you a resting point away from the warm colors, I think really helps. So, I mean, at this point, it's really starting to come together, and there's still a bunch more of the video, so that's fun. You can see I'm adjusting the beak there. I also changed the very peak of that area from being, if you look at the main roof, it was a point and now it's a flat piece. So it's interesting to watch this because I know what the final piece looked like, and you know what the final piece looked like. You've seen it at the beginning of the video. But I just think it's neat how this kind of comes together because, you know, you saw my sketch and I didn't do any more sketching beyond that. Like that was what I had in mind when I started this process. And then you're really watching the evolution of the idea here. And I think that that's really, really cool. I'm enjoying watching this. I'm enjoying talking about it as I'm watching it. And it's just kind of neat. So, you know, I'm adding the wattles to the side of the beak area to give it more chicken pizzazz. Adding the more trim, more lines. That line I just added there, I did that to make sure that I was keeping things in that similar bowed flow. Since I had given up on the idea of technical perspective, I now have to kind of put random guidelines throughout the piece like that one that's under the window, just so I can get other lines that would be parallel to have similar curves to them. That's really the trick that you use. If you're just going to wing it and eyeball it, all parallel lines need to have a similar flow to them. Otherwise, it's not going to be convincing. You can see I kept trying to change the color of the beak and the feet to yellow because, you know, when I think chicken, I think about, you know, a yellow beak. I think Looney Tunes did that to me. They make me think of, you know, Foghorn Leghorn with the yellow beak and the yellow feet. But, you know, looking out at my chickens out in the yard, a fair number of them have, you know, gray or brown or black feet. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. You can see now I've added a window in the back room there. I'm just adding more details to make it, you know, fun. The other thing, it's not just about making a piece fun. I don't want too many large areas of flat enamel. I find that they can be problematic when pins are being produced, and you can end up with flaws if you have too big of an area that's just supposed to be smooth and flat. I mean, you can end up with flaws in tiny areas too. I mean, that happens a lot. But I really do feel like it's a less likely situation when you have more smaller areas. So, and I've gone ahead and I just added that moss on the little part there. Now I'm going in and I'm kind of adjusting the steps. And I think the reason was I didn't like the little angle that was created between the leg, the foundation, and the steps. So I edited that a little bit, and now I'm adding, you know, thickness to the treads of the steps. I'm giving them an additional level of detail. It's just really helping sell. This is, you know, a three-dimensional. Is it an object? Is it an animal? I don't know what we'd call it. Chicken hut. It's a chicken hut. That's what we're going to call it. So I think right around here was when I was looking at it and thinking, and I got the idea, hey, you know what this needs? It needs a tail. We're pausing for a second. So I think soon we're going to see that happening, but it's not happening just yet. You know, I think sitting back and looking at pieces is, important. Letting it, you know, resonate in you and feel what's happening with it. I tried yellow again. You saw that I tried a pale yellow for the feet and beak. That didn't work. And I tried a darker one. I even went so far as to change the color on the side there. I think I was briefly convinced that that was going to work, and it did not. So I just go back to the gray. It's a darker gray this time, but it's still a gray. It's a different gray than the foundation color. And I'm angling the beak up a little bit there. That's kind of fun. This whole design really relies on the whimsy of the exaggerated architecture, of those exaggerated bowed lines. And if those don't flow correctly, this whole piece would just fall apart visually. It would not. Right now it's fun and whimsical, but if I didn't do as good a job with keeping the flow of those lines working in harmony, this would look very slapped together, like I didn't put much thought or effort into it. Here we go. So here we can see I just did the same thing to that little front roof peak that I did to the main roof peak. Instead of it coming to a point, it comes to a flat, which I think visually works better for this design. Now, I started adding some cut lines here to break up the roof. And I honestly wasn't sure how I was going to go about making those shingles. Like, obviously, I've separated it into the rows of shingles. And I think at one point I was kind of thinking I might be able to get away with not doing individual roof shingles, because that just seemed challenging. Because, with shingles, you can't just lay them one on top of the other. I couldn't just do lines going from the top of the roof to the bottom of the roof at this point, because that would make like a checkerboard if I did it all the way down. They have to be offset so you don't have gaps in your roof tiles. That's how roofs work. And that just got to be a little daunting of a thought, because I was like, oh man, like I have to make them flow correctly. And then I realized that I could still do them top to bottom like this. I would just do 2 sets of them and then, get rid of what I didn't needed. So it starts to get kind of complicated looking when you're looking at it right now, because like that second from the bottom row, it's got 2 sets of dividing lines for the tiles. One of them it needs, the other one it doesn't. So I kind of came up with this weird little process here that I'm dividing and subdividing things to try and get what I need as guide points to do this. It's kind of weird working in software like this. It took me a while to figure out the mindset that you need to get things to look the way that you want. So I use Inkscape. It's free. It's open source software. It's, anybody can go download it and use it. You can download it and use it if you'd like. I actually recommend it. It's great software, but it has a little bit of a learning curve. Here I'm trying the smoke again. So this is interesting. I wonder if I didn't want to try the smoke again now so I could get away with a few fewer tiles. Well, that probably wasn't the case. I think I was just experimenting here with having, the smoke coming out of the chimney and going around the chicken hut. It was a neat idea, but it didn't work visually for me. It looked complicated. It looked like it would just kind of cause more problems than it was really worth. But like I was saying about when you're working in... I see what we're doing off to the side here. We've temporarily paused working on the chicken hut, and we are now starting work on Kitty Yaga herself. So Kitty Yaga is an interesting character. She is a witch. She lives in the woods, and she flies around in a giant pestle and mortar with a broom, and she uses the broom to sweep up any evidence that she had traveled through an area. So that's her giant mortar. This is like a big stone bowl that you would use for crushing herbs. And I decided that it left kind of like a magical trail behind it, and I thought that was neat. So I'm kind of thinking about the scale here at the moment. It's kind of okay that she is too big to get in the house, because the way I have the magical trail going, you can think about it like she's closer to us than the chicken hut is. You can see I did just shrink it down some, but if you're looking at these two pin designs together as a set, you can imagine that she's flying toward us away from the chicken house, and that the house is further back in the scene. So at that point, it's okay that, she would not physically fit in the house at the size she is now. That works just fine. So she's kind of an interesting little design here because, half of her body is inside the mortar. So really the only part that I get to work on is the top half of her and, her broom and that sort of thing. The head is in fact a copy of one of the heads like I would use on my Black Cat RPG design. So in my mind, she really is kind of an offshoot of that larger project. So technically I now have Kitty Yaga in the Black Cat RPG universe, which is cool. So she's flying around in this giant pestle and mortar. I don't know what she uses the pestle for. The pestle was the part that you would stomp down into the stone mortar, and that's what you use to crush up your herbs or whatever it is that you're crushing up. We think about like apothecaries using things like this, and we think about, maybe witches when they're mashing up things to go in their potions. But, I use one of these to make pesto. So, mine's not, I can't get in mine. Mine's not big enough for me to fly around in or anything. But, I have a little pestle and mortar in my kitchen, and I use it to make pesto, and I like it. It's fun. So I don't know what she's got on the end of her pestle. Maybe that's, I'm not sure if that's, maybe the stain is worn off of it or something, or maybe she's actually got something on there, but it added a little bit of visual interest. I didn't want it to just be one color. And so you can see I'm working on the broom, and I did not like the initial, what do we call that, brush part of the broom. So what I've done is I stole from myself the bristles, I guess they're bristles, I had a couple years ago, I can't remember what year right now, but you saw it in the beginning of the video. One of the years I had a kitty flying on a broom. I took the bristles from that broom and I pasted them into this design. And that's just another great example of me recycling part of a design that I've done before, because, why reinvent the wheel if you've already got something that you like and you can use it again? I mean, you can't do that over and over and over and over so many times that like everything looks the same. But if it's just a component here and there, I don't see the problem with that. Like her head is, a copy of something. The bristles on that broom are a copy. The feet on the chicken hut are a copy of, all of things that I did once. And I'm just happening to be able to use those again in this design. And I think that that's fine. So you can kind of see, I'm trying to figure out how do I want the trail to interact with the bottom of her mortar. It's a challenge a little bit here. We'll get back to kind of something that I was saying earlier in the video. Using Inkscape in general is a little bit of a challenge at times, because when you look at these designs, sometimes they have, 3D kind of looking elements, and it's like, oh, of course, of course the broom is sitting on top of the layer that has the mortar. But, sometimes it's not the case. You have to think of each part of the design as kind of like a piece of construction paper. I don't know if any of you did this as a kid. I used to do this. You cut up pieces of construction paper and you can layer them on top of each other to, make a picture, make a scene. And that's pretty much exactly what Inkscape is. And to get the look, at least that's the way I use it. That's the great thing about art programs, right? Like there's like 10 different ways to get to the same destination. So, sometimes something will look like it's sitting on top of something, but what it really is the thing on top has a hole cut in it. And at the end of the day, you can't tell which it is. Like that was a great example. I don't know if you saw it, but the back part of the roof was briefly sitting on top of the chicken head. And so, you would think that part is behind, but it can't be because it also flows in front. So sometimes with elements that look like they go in multiple, look like they go around an element, sometimes it's broken up into two pieces, sometimes something's been cut. It's just a really interesting kind of puzzle mentality that you have to have when you're working in a software like this, where each component is kind of its own, little separate piece of paper, so to speak. I just found it very interesting, as a way to think as I was working on it. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of isolating each individual tile, because I think at one point I thought I might want to have some roof tiles different colors. So what I needed to be able to do was change the color of an individual roof tile without having to draw each one. Because it looks like they're separate tiles, but what it really is it's just one big red shape with then lines drawn over it to break it up. But if I want to change the color of some of those, I need to actually break that up into separate pieces and not just a big chunk with dividing lines. So, at this point, the design is pretty close to done. I'm adding the smoke coming out of the chimney. I think that's really cool. It was a challenge. I had to kind of work at it and think about it to figure out what that might look like. So I tried giving kind of whimsy swirls in it, and those were not as successful as I would have wanted. I like the idea of wispiness in there. I like the idea of whimsy. Curly cues have a very whimsical feel in my mind. It went along really well with kind of the whimsy perspective that I used on the architectural pieces itself. But I don't think I ever got them to a point where I really was convinced that was going to be a good way to go. So you can see I got rid of them and now it's gray. I think I add back in maybe one or so. As I'm doing the voiceover part for this and looking at this looks pretty close to done. Ah, yes, the details on the chicken feet. I was actually just kind of, it's funny. I'm just sitting here talking about the design as I'm watching the video. And I thought to myself, well, it looks good. Like, what else do you want to do with it? And then I'm like, oh, details on the chicken feet. Yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. So, this is interesting to me because, there are definitely many points when working on a design where you could just say, you know what, it's done. And then you could also always just say, you know what, let me just add a little bit more. And that's really up to, how do you feel about it? What do you want the piece to be? Not every piece needs to be super detailed. I have a couple pieces that I've designed that are, fairly simplistic, and I have a couple of those coming up. I was actually just working on one earlier today that I can't tell you about, but it's interesting to me the balance that you have to strike with details versus, larger areas to just let your eye rest. You can't just have so many details all over the place that things get confusing. I've seen a lot of pin designs that people make that are just, detail over detail over detail. And they're visually confusing. And a lot of times I just don't like them because it's hard to figure out what exactly you're looking at. So you can see that, oh, this is fun. So what I'm doing there is I'm thickening up the outline. I do that for pretty much all my pin designs these days. I make the outline just a little bit thicker than the lines on the inside of the design. I think it adds a level of fun to it. I've also found that it actually serves a practical purpose. I find that there's less over polishing on the edges of my pins when they have a thicker border around them. I think that's because when it's a thinner border, it's easy for whoever's doing the polishing on the pins, it's easy for them to just kind of push through the material because it's mostly enamel with just a little bit of metal. But when those edges are thicker, I think that metal actually provides more resistance when they're, when they have the pin up against the polishing wheel. So I've found that that thicker border actually serves a functional purpose in production of helping to keep the lines from thickening from over polishing. So there's a tip if you happen to also be a pin creator. There's my tip. Do a little bit larger border on the outside if you're having problem with over polishing near the edges. So those are the colors that I'm using on this design. You can see I switched things up a little bit just to try things out. I've mentioned in another video, the colors are super important. You need to, it's not you need to, you get to call out specifically what color you're using the color codes. And that's very helpful just from a standpoint of, you want a very specific shade of green to be used for the moss. Okay, there are lots of different shades you can use, and it's great to be able to say this is the specific one we're using here. So the design is looking really good at this point. My biggest concern with this design is that there are so many cells, there are so many small pieces, especially on the chicken hut, that I was just a little concerned that I would have a high flaw rate, because with so many different cells, if one of them is overfilled or underfilled, that's a problem. And I think when you have a bunch of them like that, you're kind of inviting a little bit of problem. But I guess at that point, you're really just trusting that the production partner you've chosen to work with is going to take care of your design. And that can be a challenge as an artist, I think. I spend so much time working on these designs and thinking about them. Like when you're watching this video, it's one continuous session of work being done. But when I'm working on them, one, it's nowhere near this fast because I'm a slow artist and it takes me time to do them. But I also take frequent breaks to just think about the design or stare at it. I will often, send a copy of it to my phone and think about it overnight. And, like in the morning as I'm eating breakfast, I'll be staring at the picture on my phone, trying to figure out, why does the bottom half of this design look weird to me? What can I do to fix that? So you can see I just added kind of leg feathers around the tops of the chicken legs there. I think that helped a lot. That added something to it. That window was something that was bugging me, so I adjusted that a little bit to make that feel a little more in tune with the lines that were around it. There I've added some little bumpiness to the top of the moss area. I'm rounding out the moss. All these little changes that are happening at this point in the design are typically a result of a thought that I had while staring at the design on my phone or on my computer after it was mostly finished. That's part of my process. I have to spend a fair amount of time doing that. I just look at it and try and see, like, is there a part of it that feels awkward or weird to me? And if there is, I need to try and figure out how I can correct it. And honestly, sometimes I can't correct it. There are some times where I just have to say, you know what? It is what it is, and we're going to move forward. So here, what I'm doing is I thought maybe I should add shading to one side of it. So there was my attempt at shading it. And it doesn't look bad. It actually looks pretty good with the shading. But I generally try to avoid doing shading in these designs. So then, after I was pretty much done with the front of it, I'm still adding a couple little details here and there to the design. But I also had to think about what I wanted to do with the back of the chicken hut, because you can see it there on the right. The chicken hut technically both pieces are limited edition because I'm not planning on having more than 100 of either of them made. But the chicken hut itself is the one that's numbered. It's going to have laser numbering. If you've ever gotten a limited edition pin from me before, you've seen how that works on the back of the pins. But I had to decide what elements I wanted to include from the front on the back. That's something I enjoy doing. I like, on my bigger limited edition pins, I like having parts of them basically embossed on it. And so you can see on the back of the pin, I put my logo and my copyright notice. And that's pretty close to the finalized design right there. I may have made one or two little changes afterward, right before sending it for production, but this is the design. It's really fun. I think it's whimsical. I like it a lot. And I'm hoping that there are those of you out there who also really enjoy this design. So I hope that you enjoy this design. I hope that if you intend to get one, I hope you do. I've only ever sold out of one of my limited edition pin designs. Most of them I still have, a handful hanging around, if nothing else, B grades. But I don't know. I've got a feeling that this one might be more popular than some of the other ones. We'll find out. I'm going to initially release this design through a Kickstarter campaign, and if there's any of them left after that, I'll go ahead and put them up in my shop. I'll put a link to the Kickstarter campaign below, and then I'll update that to my shop once that campaign is closed. But I hope that you've enjoyed spending some time with me today, and if you want to see more videos like this, go ahead and like this one and subscribe. And whenever I have a new video for a pin, you'll get notified and you can watch along with the process. So thanks for spending some time with me, and hope to see you back real soon.